Hi, everyone. Hope you are having a wonderful day. I am ready for today's lesson. So, what you will need today, you will actually need paper and probably while you are gathering paper and pencil, I would go ahead and gather a couple pieces of paper. Okay. Because you will need that because we're going to do more than one activity today. In all of these lessons, I have taught you vocabulary. I've taught you comprehension, a whole lot of comprehension. I've taught you how to think beyond the text, making inferences and drawing conclusions and visualizing when there are things that you need to be thinking about when there aren't pictures or other graphics there for you to remember. So today, I am going to, along with a couple days I've decided next week, focus in on something that is a big it term in teaching right now. And if you're watching this and you're a boy or girl that has gone to school before, which chances are if you're watching this, you have, this is a term that you probably have heard your teacher use. It came around big time a few years ago. And you may go, as soon as you hear this, because you may be so over it, you can't handle it anymore. But hopefully I teach you today that it's not something for you to worry about, because I don't call this close reading very often. You need to know that close reading, boys and girls, is good reading. The first time that I heard this term a few years ago, I remember I was sitting in a teacher's meeting or something, and I'd taken a bunch of reading classes, and I felt like that I was a really good teacher when it came to reading and writing. And I remember I was sitting there thinking, well, this is just what good readers do. This is how to teach reading. This is what boys and girls need to do, and not only boys and girls, but adults need to do to comprehend what it is that they are trying to remember, what it is that they need to take away from a text. So I wrote here, close reading, and I drew a little apple, and I said, think of an apple, because that is how I teach it to boys and girls in my class. One thing that I did, after this term came out, and there are all these posters and things going around, but I said, some of that is too wordy. It's too complicated. And there are so many different things that boys and girls can do when it comes to close reading. So many different comprehension activities, because that's really what close reading is. It's a set of activities that you can do, or usually at least 3 activities that you can do to dive further into a text. So I remember I was thinking about it. In fact, I may have been in the shower washing my hair when I was, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I do a lot of thinking. You might do that too, when you are walking or taking a shower, something like that, when you're by yourself and your brain's able to work. And I said, oh, it's like an apple. And so that's what I use for my boys and girls. And you know what? I hear my boys and girls every single year in my class say, that's like the peel, or that's the pulp, or that's the core of the apple. So I developed a few years ago this little poster. And in fact, I actually have these posters on my Teachers Pay Teachers store that people can print out. And I keep one in my room. And I say a close read is like an apple, because the first level, I call them peel questions. These focus on the literary elements. These focus on things that are very important, but they're really just kind of on the surface. You have to do them. You have to know them. But they don't really dive deeper into the text. I say that they are right there answers lots of times. They're on the surface of a text. They're like the peel of an apple. Now, the peel is important because it protects everything else. The second line or the second set are pulp questions. In your pulp questions, those are going to focus more on vocabulary. They're going to focus on the story structure. They're going to focus on the meat of the text. And you might say, well, an apple is vegetarian, and how can a text have meat to it? Well, it does. That's the stuff that you eat that fills you up, that makes you say, okay, I'm really understanding what's there. But what is it that holds the whole apple together? And where are the seeds located? The seeds you take and you can plant for the future. So our seed questions right here are our core questions. Those are the ones that are in-depth connections. Those are ones where you are thinking beyond the text. So it's really an apple. The surface is the peel. The inside is the pulp. The good meaty questions, the ones that you need to dive a little bit deeper. And the core that holds the whole apple together, but also has the seeds for the future. Those are your level 3s. So I'm going to do one of all 3 levels. And you might say, well, these are kind of activities that we've done before. Absolutely. Close reading is what good readers do. Any time that you work on any kind of comprehension or vocabulary or anything at all in reading, you are doing a section of a close read, and you're doing a section of what good readers do. It's not brain surgery, folks. I promise you that. So, what the text I'm going to use today is from a book. It is a short story that when I was, I used to get this book from the library all the time, and I loved this book, and also a book of tall tales by this author, retold. Well, she didn't necessarily write these texts. She's retelling them in this story in some of her own words, because that's what's great about mythology. Favorite Greek myths. Although in this book, she uses the Roman names often, retold by Mary Pope Osborne and illustrated by Troy Howe. I love this book. And when I got the chance to buy it, I was like, that needs to go into my classroom. All of these stories in here are thousands of years old. So if you're not familiar with mythology, you need to understand that thousands of years ago, it's very important to know that the people were not stupid. They were not stupid. They had functioning societies. Here, the United States has things that are based on ideas from the ancient Greeks. Our democracy idea actually comes from them. Many of our symbols come from them. The Greek gods are very much alive, but they're just stories. Now, thousands of years ago, the people did believe that they were real because they didn't have the science that we do today. They didn't understand what it is I'm going to read today, why we have a change of the seasons. So they said there have to be characters, there have to be beings that are controlling this. So that's where the story of the kidnapping comes from, which is probably one of the most famous texts in Greek mythology. This is called the story of Ceres and Proserpina, also known as the story of Demeter and Persephone. And I am going to read this through today. Sometimes with a close read, you stop and you do some activities, but the ones that I've chosen to do for this today are all going to be done at the end of the text. So all I'm going to do is right now read this short story to you entitled The Kidnapping, retold by Mary Pope Osborne and illustrated by Troy Howe in her book, Favorite Greek Myths. One day, Proserpina, the young maiden of spring, was picking wildflowers with her mother, Ceres, the goddess of grain. Entering the cool, moist woods, Proserpina filled her basket with lilies and violets. But when she spied the white petals of the narcissus flower, she strayed far from her mother. Just as Proserpina picked a beautiful narcissus, the earth began to rumble. Suddenly, the ground cracked open, splitting fern beds and ripping flowers and trees from the roots. Then out of the dark depths sprang Pluto, god of the underworld, also known as Hades. Standing up in his black chariot, Pluto ferociously drove his stallions toward Proserpina. The maiden screamed for her mother, but Ceres was far away and could not save her. Pluto grabbed Proserpina and drove his chariot back into the earth. When the ground closed up again, it left not even a seam. When the mountains echoed with Proserpina's screams, her mother rushed into the woods, but it was too late. Her daughter had disappeared. Beside herself with grief, Ceres began searching for her kidnapped daughter in every land. For 9 days, the goddess did not rest, but carried 2 torches through the cold night, searching for Proserpina. On the 10th day, Hecate, the goddess of the dark moon, also kind of the goddess of magic, came to Ceres. Holding up a lantern, she shrouded the goddess and said, "I also heard your daughter's screams, but I didn't see her. Let us fly to Helios, the sun god, and ask him what happened," also known as Apollo. Ceres and Hecate flew to Helios, the sun god, and weeping, Ceres asked Helios if he'd seen her daughter while he was shining down upon the woods. "I pity you, Ceres," said Helios, "for I know what it is to lose a child, but I know the truth. Pluto wanted Proserpina for his wife, so he asked his brother Jupiter, which is Zeus, to give him permission to kidnap her. Jupiter gave his consent, and now your daughter reigns over the land of the dead with Pluto." So yeah, these are Greek myths. These stories started in Greece, but then the Romans adopted them and renamed them. Many of their character traits stayed the exact same. Ceres screamed in rage and thrust her fist toward Mount Olympus, cursing Jupiter for aiding in the kidnapping of his own daughter. Then she returned to Earth, disguised as an old woman, and began wandering from town to town. One day, as she rested by a well, Ceres watched 4 princesses gathering water. Remembering her own daughter, she began to weep. "Where are you from, old woman?" one princess asked. "Oh, I was kidnapped by pirates and I escaped," said Ceres. "Now I know not where I am." Feeling pity for her, the princesses brought Ceres home to their palace. At the palace, their mother, the queen, took an immediate liking to Ceres when she noticed how good she was with her baby son, the prince. When she asked Ceres if she would live with them and be his nurse, the goddess gladly consented. Ceres grew deeply fond of the child. The thought that she would someday grow old and die was too much for her. The thought that he would someday grow old and die was too much for her to bear. So she decided to change him from a mortal to a god. Every night when everyone else was asleep, she poured a magic liquid on the body of the baby prince and held him in a fire. Soon the prince began to look like a god, and everyone was amazed at his beauty and strength. The changes in her child hid in the nursery and watched Ceres and the boy. When she saw Ceres place the child on the fire, she screamed for help. "Stupid woman," shouted Ceres, snatching baby from the fire. "I was going to make your son a god. He would have lived forever. Now he'll be a mere mortal and die like the rest of you." The king and queen then realized that the boy's nurse was Ceres, the powerful goddess of grain, and they were terrified. "I will only forgive you," said Ceres, "if you build a great temple in my honor. Then I will teach your people the secret rites to help the corn grow." At dawn, the king ordered a great temple to be built for the goddess. But after the temple was completed, Ceres did not reveal the secret rites. Instead, she sat by herself all day, still grieving for her kidnapped daughter. She was in such deep mourning that everything on earth stopped growing. It was a terrible year. There was no food, and people and animals began to starve. Jupiter grew worried. If Ceres caused the people on earth to die, there would be no more gifts and offerings for him. Let's think about that. He's not worried about dying. He's worried about them not offering him gifts. He was a bit conceited. That was one of his character traits in these stories. Finally, he thanked God from Mount Olympus to speak with her. The gods came to Ceres and offered her gifts and pleaded with her to make the earth fertile again, meaning able to grow things. "I never will," she said, "not unless my daughters return safely to me." Jupiter had no choice but to bid his son Mercury, the messenger god, also known as Hermes, to return Proserpina to her mother. Wandering the underworld, Mercury passed through the dark, smoky caverns filled with ghosts and phantoms until he came to the misty throne room of Pluto and Proserpina. Though the maiden was still frightened, she'd grown accustomed to her new home and had almost forgotten about her life on Earth. "Your brother Jupiter's ordered you to return Proserpina to her mother," Mercury told Pluto. "Otherwise, Ceres will destroy the Earth." Pluto could not disobey Jupiter, but he didn't want his wife to leave forever, so he said, "She can go, but first we must be alone." When Mercury left, Pluto spoke softly to Proserpina. "If you stay, you'll be the queen of the underworld, and the dead will give you great honors." As Proserpina stared into the eyes of the king of the dead, she dimly remembered the joy of her mother's love. She wildflowers in the woods and open sunlit meadows. I would rather return, she whispered. Pluto sighed and said, All right, then go. But before you leave, eat this small seed from a pomegranate fruit. It is the food of the underworld. It will bring you good luck. Hades, definitely a trickster. Proserpina ate the single tiny seed. Then Pluto's black chariot carried her and Mercury away. The two stallions burst through the dry ground of earth and galloped over the barren countryside to the temple where Ceres mourned for her daughter. When Ceres saw her daughter coming, she ran down the hillside, and Proserpina sprang from the chariot into her mother's arms. All day, the two talked excitedly of what had happened during their separation. But when Proserpina told Ceres about eating the pomegranate seed, the goddess hid her face and moaned in anguish. What have I done? Said Proserpina. You have eaten the sacred food of the underworld, said Ceres. Now you must return for half the year to live with Pluto, your husband. And this is how the seasons began. For when fall and winter come, the earth grows cold and barren because Proserpina lives in the underworld with Pluto, and her mother mourns. But when her daughter comes back to her, Ceres, the goddess of grain, turns the world to spring and to summer. The corn grows and everything flowers again. So here in North America, it is spring. So we can, if we wish that this story was true, we know it's not. It is mythology. Thousands of years ago, they made up this story to give them something to believe in, to explain why things grow at certain times, why it gets warm at certain times and cold. They didn't understand that our earth circled in what's called an elliptical kind of oval shape around the sun. And it's also slightly tilted. So when it circles and it is tilted toward the sun, the northern hemisphere is warmer. But when it is on the other side and it's tilted away like this, the southern hemisphere is warm and the northern hemisphere changes a bit. They didn't understand that. So we may wish this story was true. We may wish that right now, Persephone or Proserpina is back on Earth with her mother. We know it's not true, but it's fun to think about. So I am going to keep my text next to me, and I am going to go through 3 activities. So the first one that I've chosen to do is listing key events. This is our Peel question. So our Peel we're going to focus on. This is where you'll need paper and a pencil. These are going to be our level 1s. Key events are important. It's just sequence, and it's important to list them in a sequence because it tells our story in a summary. So on the surface, do we need to tell our text in a summary? Do we need to tell it in order? Summary and sequence, I like to say, are married. They're together all the time. You can't do one without the other. Absolutely. We have to be able to do that in order to dive in deeper. So I'm going to list 3 key events that happened here. Well, the first key event is probably Proserpina is kidnapped by Hades. And since we're talking about the Roman names here in our myth, I better call him Pluto because that is his Roman name. Proserpina is kidnapped by Pluto, the god. And notice what I do here. The mythological gods are lowercase g because it's like saying character, the word character. We lowercase this. Now, if you and your family choose to believe in a higher being or beings in today's world, those would be capitalized because many people believe that they exist. We know these characters have been proven they don't. They're just characters. We lowercase it. So the god of the underworld. Now, I am going to capitalize underworld because it is the name of a place in our text. Okay. So the second main event that we know happened is, I could say, Ceres, her mother, made the world stop growing, right? I'm going to say of all plants, because it said that the world went barren, which means it was dark, it was cold, it was sad. Nothing grew. The trees didn't grow, the flowers didn't grow. So Ceres, her mother, stopped the growing of all plants because she was so upset. And then the third thing, this is going to be kind of more than one event. Well, I guess I could do maybe 4. I'll do 4. So we can say Mercury, who is the messenger god. Mercury returned Proserpina to Earth, but she had eaten a seed from the dead. Oops, I misspelled dead. Huh. That's a problem. So because she ate that, what happened at the end? She is only able to stay. In this text, it said she ate 1 seed. But in other texts I've read, it was that she ate, 6 seeds, where half the year it is growing season, the other half it's not. But where I live, there is also a growing season in the fall too. So it depends on where you live. The further away from the equator you live, the less growing season that you have throughout the year. But here in my area, we probably have about, 8 to 9 months of things that can grow and can be harvested. So, Proserpina must live part of her year with Pluto, and then it is winter. And that is because of Demeter, or Ceres, mourning for her daughter's loss at that time. So here are my level 1. Here's my level 1 that I'm doing. I know I have comprehended the text. I am able to look at the text and I can see what, that I have that prior knowledge now that I can go a little bit deeper. Okay. So my level 2, that's my pulp. Remember that? I'm going to put up my poster again. My pulp question, my level 2, where I'm going to focus on maybe some vocabulary, I often will need to reread here. And I can write a short answer. Maybe I will look more at some vocabulary, but in this case, I can also look a little bit deeper into a character's personal traits. I've lost my page. Okay, so I'm going to reread, and this is often where we go back and we look at a little part of the text again. I'm going to reread the part where Ceres goes and talks to the princess and comes and lives with the prince and princess's family. One day, as she rested by a well, Ceres watched 4 princesses gathering water. Remembering her own daughters, she began to weep. "Where are you from, O woman?" one princess asked. "Oh, I was kidnapped by pirates and I escaped," said Ceres. "Now I know not where I am." Feeling pity for her, the princesses brought Ceres home to their palace. At the palace, their mother, the queen, took an immediate liking to Ceres when she noticed how good she was with her baby son, the prince. When she asked Ceres if she would live with them and be his nurse, the goddess gladly consented. Ceres grew deeply fond of the child. The thought that he would someday grow old and die was too much for her to bear. So she decided to change him from a mortal to a god. Every night when everyone was asleep, she poured a magic liquid on the body of the baby prince and held him in the fire. Soon the prince began to look like a god, and everyone was amazed by his beauty and strength. The queen, disturbed by the changes in her child, hid in the nursery and watched Ceres and the boy. And when she saw Ceres place the child into the fire, she screamed for help. "Stupid woman," shouted Ceres, snatching the baby from the fire. "I was going to make your son a god. We would have lived forever. Now he'll be a mere mortal and die like the rest of you." The king and queen then realized that the boy's nurse was Ceres and the powerful goddess of grain, and they were terrified. "I will only forgive you," said Ceres, "if you build a great temple in my honor. Then I will teach your people the secret rites to help the corn grow." And so then we know that they did that, but she still wasn't happy. So let's look now a little deeper at Ceres' character at this point. So this is my Pulp, and it's a level 2. So how was Ceres character? Who owns the character? Ceres, but because there's an S at the end, all that I need is an apostrophe. How was Ceres' character while her daughter was kidnapped? Well, I can restate and answer this, support it with some text. I would say Ceres was depressed. She had gone almost mentally ill, don't you think? I would say so. She was so depressed, it had caused her mental illness. So Ceres' character was so depressed, it caused mental illness. Don't you think? She was trying to make another person's child her own. She was going to eventually steal the child and raise it as her own, as a god, because she was so longing for her child. So maybe in this story, this was a way for the ancient Greeks to explain depression and how when people do lose someone they love, it can cause such amazing and massive grief that they do things that they wouldn't have done before. So my text evidence would be in the text. I'm going to show that it's not from me, it's coming from the text. In the text, Ceres began turning another child into a god. And I can really think about, she wanted this child to be her own, didn't she? She wanted this child to take the place of Proserpina. Yeah, that's how upset she was. She didn't know what to do. Okay, so this shows I'm at the pulp, so I understand how Ceres is as a character now. I understand the grief that she's going through. I understand that she is not doing the things that she's doing because she's being mean. And if you read other texts, other Greek myths, Ceres is a very likable and kind goddess because she gives, blessings on the fields and things like that for the people to live and grow and the animals to live and grow. But here in this text, it shows how vulnerable, meaning how sad and depressed she was when she lost her daughter to Hades. So now I am going to dive even deeper into my level 3. And my level 3 is thinking beyond the text. This is my core of my apple. And my core is my level 3. Okay, so let's talk about Hades. I know that we talked about, or also known as Pluto in this text. I know we talked about how Pluto is definitely a trickster character, and he, in many of the texts, can be known as someone that wants his way, because when you think about death never seems to be fair, is it? You always wish for more time with those that you love, with your family members, your pets, but it's part of the life cycle. And as hard as it is something that we have to accept. But the Greek myths made Hades in kind of a character that is unfair. So I am going to want to answer this question. Oops. And I'm going to put this in quotation marks, that life is not fair. Have you ever said that before? Oh, it's not fair. This just isn't fair that this happened. I've said it. There have been things that have happened in my life that have made me mad and sad because it's not fair that this is happening to me and not other people. But that's life. So how is Pluto's character a sign that life is not fair all the time? So this is really connecting it, making a connection to ourselves and moving past. So do you see the difference between what we asked with Ceres' character? What does this part of the text prove right here? How is she feeling? But now it's, how does Hades' character prove that life's not fair? Well, this is where I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into my text. And instead of maybe writing just 2 sentences, I can write a little more. If I have a whole lot of room, I could write a full paragraph about this. So how is it not fair? Well, Hades shows life is not fair. I have to restate before I answer. Because he pretended to allow Proserpina a life of happiness, but took away part of it each year. So she said she's happy with her mother. Ceres is happy. The world is happy and everything's growing and warm and beautiful outside. But every day, are things happy? No. So Hades is showing that sometimes things are happy. This is really a theme, isn't it? Some days in life are easy and other days are just plain hard. And right now, we could say this whole time period for our world is probably a bit harder than it should be. It's not fair that we're going through the coronavirus, that we have to stay home. But sometimes life's not fair, but we still have to get through it. So we could say the story, it's another way of citing our evidence. The story says, part of the year, she can live on Earth, but other times she is not allowed. So how does this relate to us? Well, sometimes I can explain this by saying sometimes life is hard. Don't you agree? Sometimes life is hard. We have to keep going because eventually Persephone or Proserpina gets to return to her mother in the text, right? And be happy again. So sometimes life is hard, but we have to keep going because it will get better. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but if you keep going on, it can get better. That's something we have to remember right now, too. So it's not fair. He tricked her. He said, fine, you can return some of the time, but you're still going to live with me some of the time, too. So there you go. Looking at the surface, being able to comprehend it, looking deeper into how a character is feeling at a time, and then going even deeper into the core, and then planting seeds for the future to show that we understand even more. So that is an introduction to close reading. I'm going to do some more again next week. Remember, it's what good readers do. I call it good reading. Maybe you should too. I will see you tomorrow for Friday for a fun activity. And until then, good job. 2 little poodles, goodbye. Keep working. You are smart.